Okay, we're going to start with the back bodice facing right side up and just pull the top basting strings just a little bit to gather the back slightly. We're only doing this so that applying the straps is slightly easier. And then you're going to kind of pinch the back and the strap together so that the right side of the strap is to the wrong side of the back and that the edges match up together, and match the straps up at the marks on the pattern for the placement guide. And once they are all pinned in place, you want to just tack or baste them in place right along the edge, which makes it easier for our next step. Then you're going to take the center of the bias and the center of the back, and you're going to match those up so that the right side of the bias is towards the wrong side of the back, and then match up the top of the bias with the top of the back, and this is going to sandwich over the back straps that have been tacked into place, and you're just going to match up the bias down into the point where you started gathering. Same with the other side, match it down to the point where you started gathering, and then you'll pull the rest of the gather and evenly space it across the back of the bias so that it gathers to fit the bias band. Once it's fully gathered and pinned into place, you're going to sew with a 3/8 seam allowance from the top of the back curve down around and over to the others. And at this point you are going to be sewing your straps into place fully as well, so they should be sandwiched between the bias and the back. Okay, now you want to press the bias so it's out flat, and then you're going to fold the bias band in so that it meets the seam allowance, and then fold it in again so that the fold covers the stitch line, and sew that in place along the bias. Okay, now the back is done and you've got your bias on the front and back and straps sewn in place. For the front, with the center of the bias band and the center of the bodice, match the right side of the bias band to the wrong side of the bodice at the center point, and then match the edge point up with the edge points of the front bodice, just as you did with the back. And then you're going to pull the top basting stitches together to gather the front bodice to fit to the bias band and fit the neckline. Once it's all pinned in place, sew along the edge. And just like we did with the back, we're going to press the bias out flat and then turn it towards the seam allowance and then turn it again to cover the seam. Once the binding is sewn in place, we're going to sew the front and back right sides together at the side seams, and at this point too you'll want to finish the seams as you desire. Okay, now to do the arm bands, we're going to be sewing them on the side seam here. So with the bands sewn together to create a loop, put the seam of the loop at the side seam of the bodice, and with the right side of the bias towards the wrong side of the bodice, just like you did with your other bindings, you're just going to match the binding up towards the top of the front, and then same with the back. And once you get the back and the front matched up, there will be part of the strap that is in the middle of the two bodices where it meets, and that would be the top of the shoulder. So you're going to sew the bias to the arm curve here. Okay, next we're going to press the arm bias out just as we did the others, and we're going to again fold it so that the edge comes down to the seam allowance, and then fold it again so that it covers the stitch line. And at the shoulder point, when you're folding it, you want to make sure that you are covering the bias edges from the front and the back in your stitch line, so that so that the raw edge is not hanging out when you sew, and then sew the bias in place. Okay, Okay, now that the arm bias is sewn in place, the top of your dress or top is done and you just need to hem. Then you are finished.